Drivers, this is a subject I believe we can do a video on once a week. And it's called the Great Freight Recession. Starting with our transportation industry, then warehousing, neighborhood pharmacies, and grocery stores, all of which have suddenly closed. All of which will deeply affect the livelihood of the American economy. Closures that will have long-term profound effects on the overall health and vibrancy of communities nationwide, pushing the U.S. commerce into a position where it is currently under so much pressure, so immense that it could turn a lump of coal into, well, a slightly smaller, more stressed-out lump of coal. We're talking about a perfect storm of stubbornly high operating costs and plummeting freight rates. It's a brutal, unforgiving landscape for all of us who are trying to keep our country moving. This past summer year has unleashed a tidal wave of trucking company stores and pharmacy closures, and a veritable line of financial distress snaking its way across the nation. From small family-owned operations to sizable regional players, the casualties have been piling up at an alarming rate. It's not just a few isolated incidents, it's a pattern, a symptom of a much deeper sickness in the industry. This is truly a growing apocalypse, and we've got a front row seat. Before we dive into what's happening in the transportation industry, I would like to first talk about a place my family and I would visit often. I'm talking about Rite Aid Pharmacy. As part of a bankruptcy process, Rite Aid closed nationwide all of its remaining open stores. Rite Aid Corporation was one of the largest pharmacy companies in the U.S. These closures affected major cities like California, New York, and Pennsylvania. In California alone, nearly 200 stores closed. The closure of Rite Aid marks a significant shift in the retail pharmacy business, which in some smaller neighborhoods may lead to an absence that will create a sense of isolation for some residents as they now search to replace what was once a stable community friend. Next, we have another pharmacy giant that's in the process of closing some of its stores. I'm talking about Walgreens. In October of 2024, Walgreens announced a multi-year strategy to close about 1,200 underperforming stores, with roughly 500 scheduled to close in 2025. The closures will focus on stores with negative cash flow, underperforming sales, expiring lease, or locations where Walgreens owns the real estate. Walgreens operates approximately 8,500 to 8,700 stores nationwide, of which about 25% were unprofitable and have been marked for closure under the optimization plan. Walgreens halted its quarterly dividend to strengthen its balance sheet and boost free cash flow, signaling broader financial restructuring efforts. One specific example, Walgreens' closure in Laredo, Texas, shut down April of 2025. The closure was attributed to the broader national plan targeting underperforming stores and economic pressures. Most staff were offered transfers or severance. Now let's drive to Chicago, a critical logistics hub, and dive back into the transportation industry. It was home to AZA Transportation, a company that, by all accounts, was a solid, dependable regional hauler. They were part of the scenery, a familiar name moving goods around the Midwest. But being solid isn't enough when the economic ground beneath you is turning to quicksand. AZA found itself caught in a terrifying trucking vice. Costs were going up, revenue was going down, and debt was growing. The carrier reported to have 70 power units in operations. That's 70 drivers and worst 70 families, now deeply affected by this loss. The final numbers in their filing paint a truly bleak picture. They listed liabilities between $1 million and $10 million, which is a significant hole to be in. But here's the kicker. Their assets were estimated at less than $500,000. That's not just a gap, that's a chasm. It's the financial equivalent of trying to plug the Hoover Dam with a single wad of chewing gum. AZA's collapse is a textbook example of how quickly rising costs and suffocating debt can dismantle what once seemed like a sturdy business, leaving a trail of unpaid bills and unemployed drivers in its wake. Staying in Illinois, let's talk about Dolche Truckload Corp. Now, Dolche wasn't a small fry operation. They were running a fairly large fleet, a significant presence on the roads. You'd think a company of that size would have the resilience to weather a storm, perhaps some financial ballast to keep it steady. But as it turns out, a bigger fleet can often mean bigger debts, and in Dolche's case, those debts became an anchor dragging the whole enterprise to the bottom of the financial sea. Their Chapter 7 filing revealed a company drowning in obligations, primarily to banks and equipment lenders, and the numbers are again staggering and tell a story of leverage gone wrong. Dolche reported liabilities in the same $1 million to $10 million range as AZA, but their assets were pegged at a paltry $50,000 to $100,000. Think about that. For every dollar they owned, they owed at least 10 and potentially up to 200. That's not a business model, it's a cry for help. It perfectly illustrates a dangerous trend where the value of the very trucks a company relies on can't keep pace with the loans taken out to acquire them, especially when freight revenue dries up and there's no cash flow to service the debt. Now let's head south to the Sunshine State, which has been anything but sunny for GD Transport LLC. This Florida-based carrier situation is a bit more mysterious, a little foggy, which is fitting for a story about financial collapse. The company hasn't disclosed the exact size of its fleet in its Chapter 7 filing, which can sometimes happen in the initial chaos of a bankruptcy. It's like a suspect pleading the fifth on how many getaway cars they actually had. But you don't need a full manifest to see the wreckage here. The financial disclosure tells us most of what we need to know. GD Transport listed its assets in a range between $100,001 and $500,000, a modest sum. Their liabilities, however, were listed in a much wider and more worrying range, from $1 million all the way up to $10 million. That massive gap strongly suggests we're looking at a mid-sized operator, a company big enough to rack up serious debt, but not big enough to absorb the shock of a prolonged freight downturn. They were caught in the middle, struggling to cover massive overhead, things like insurance, fuel, and maintenance, with revenue streams that had weakened to a trickle. It's a classic case of being squeezed from both ends. Let's move up to Kentucky, the land of bluegrass, bourbon, and, apparently, brutal credit conditions for regional carriers. Here we find Contract Managed Services, another victim of the industry's tightening financial squeeze. This company's story is a powerful reminder that in today's economic climate, access to credit is like oxygen. You don't notice it when it's there, but the moment it gets thin, everything starts to shut down. Their Chapter 7 filing shows a company that was fundamentally weighed down by carrying more debt than it had assets, a scenario that is becoming tragically common. The specifics of their filing lay it all out. Liabilities between $500,000 and $1 million, versus assets of only $100,000 to $500,000. While not as dramatic a gap as some others, it's still a fatal imbalance. For smaller regional players like Contract Managed Services, this is the nightmare scenario. They don't have the massive cash reserves or diversified portfolios of the industry giants. When freight rates fall and lenders get nervous, the credit lines that are essential for covering daily operating expenses can dry up overnight, turning a manageable situation into a full-blown crisis. This next one is particularly tough, because it's a story about longevity meaning absolutely nothing in the face of a market downturn. AZA Transportation Inc. wasn't some fly-by-night operation that popped up during the pandemic boom only to bust. This was a long-time carrier, a company that had been in business for decades. They had navigated countless economic cycles, fuel crises, and regulatory changes. They were, for all intents and purposes, a survivor. They had seen it all, or so you would think. Their decades of experience should have been a shield, a testament to their resilience. But in the summer of 2025, that shield finally broke. After weathering so many storms, AZA Transportation filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy protection, signaling the end of the road. Their filing listed a familiar, painful story: liabilities between $1 and $10 million against assets of just $50,000 to $100,000. The collapse of a long-standing company like this sends a particularly chilling message throughout the industry. It proves that no one is safe. If a carrier with decades of experience and established relationships can be brought to its knees, it underscores just how deep and unforgiving the current freight recession truly is. Now over to Ohio for a slightly different kind of bankruptcy story, one that involves a glimmer of hope, albeit a very faint one. Meet TJ Trucking Enterprises, LLC. Faced with financial ruin, they didn't immediately opt for liquidation. Instead, they filed under Subchapter 5 of Chapter 11. Now, for those of you not fluent in legalese, Subchapter 5 is a relatively new tool designed specifically to help small businesses reorganize. It's supposed to be faster, cheaper, and more streamlined than a traditional Chapter 11, offering a potential path to survival rather than a straight trip to the corporate graveyard. So, on the surface, this sounds positive. They're trying to fight, to restructure their debts and keep the lights on. But you have to look at the numbers, and that's where the optimism starts to fade. TJ Trucking listed liabilities between $100,001 and $500,000, while their assets were valued at a mere $0 to $50,000. That liability-to-asset ratio is, to put it mildly, atrocious. It suggests that even with the protections of Subchapter 5, they are facing a monumental, near-vertical uphill climb. Down in Florida again, we have the case of ODM Truck Inc. And when I say this is a small carrier, I mean it. This isn't a fleet, it's a single unit. According to their Chapter 7 filing, ODM Truck Inc. was a micro-carrier with just one truck and one driver. This is the quintessential owner-operator, the bedrock of the American trucking industry, the very definition of a small business on wheels. They are the most exposed and the most vulnerable. And sure enough, this one-truck business was caught in the same freight storm that's sinking much larger companies. They filed for bankruptcy, listing both assets and liabilities in the $101,000 to $500,000 range. While the numbers might seem smaller, the principle is the same. Cratering freight rates, combined with sky-high costs for fuel, insurance, and maintenance, made it impossible to turn a profit. The story of ODM is a stark and important reality check. It shows that this recession isn't just picking off the weak members of the herd, it's devastating the entire ecosystem, right down to the individual entrepreneur just trying to make a living. Just when you think this is only a story about small to medium-sized businesses getting crushed, the freight recession comes along and says, "Hold my beer. Let's go to Texas, where everything is bigger, including, it seems, the bankruptcies." Here we have Wendover Transportation, LLC. Now, Wendover is on a completely different scale from the mom-and-pop shops and regional haulers we've discussed. This isn't just one company going under, it's part of a much larger, more complex financial implosion. This case is being jointly administered with the bankruptcy of its parent company, Run It One Time, LLC. This is significant. It shows that the freight crisis isn't just contained to the little guys. Large, multi-entity transportation groups are also feeling immense pressure. When a company like Wendover, as part of a larger network, files for bankruptcy, it signals a systemic weakness that goes far beyond a single bad quarter or a few unpaid invoices. It points to broader strategic failures and an inability to adapt to the new market reality, even with the resources that a larger organization theoretically possesses. It's proof that in this downturn, size and scale are no guarantee of safety. The rot goes all the way up. Finally, let's head to Colorado for a story that really hits home because it's about the loss of a local institution. Indian Creek Express was a family-owned company with deep roots in its community. This wasn't some faceless corporation. It was a local business, likely run by people whose names and faces were known around town. They had a history, a reputation built over years of reliable service in the region. These are the kinds of companies that form the connective tissue of local economies, providing stable jobs and essential services. And now, they're gone. Indian Creek Express filed for Chapter 7 liquidation, another casualty of an unforgiving market. The collapse of a long-established family-owned business like this is a potent symbol of the human cost of this freight recession. It highlights how razor-thin profit margins, coupled with the relentless pressure of mounting debt, are gutting the heart of the industry. It's not just about assets and liabilities on a spreadsheet. It's about a family's legacy being erased, employees losing their livelihoods, and a community losing a business that was part of its identity. So, what have we learned from this grim tour of trucking's corporate cemetery? A few key patterns emerge, each more worrying than the last. First, in nearly every case, debt is dramatically outpacing assets. Companies are leveraged to the hilt, and when revenue drops, there is simply no cushion to absorb the blow. Second, absolutely no one is safe. From the single owner-operator in Florida to the multi-entity conglomerate in Texas, from the decades-old family business to the sizable regional fleet, this downturn is an indiscriminate predator. The idea that size or history provides immunity is a dangerous fantasy that has been thoroughly debunked this summer. The ripple effects of these closures are immense, spreading from drivers and dispatchers to mechanics, lenders, and the businesses that rely on them. And frankly, this is probably just the beginning. All signs point to continued pressure as 2025 progresses. We should expect to see more bankruptcy filings, more liquidations, and more heartbreaking closures in the months to come. The market has not yet found its bottom, and there are likely many more companies hanging on by a thread just one bad week or one missed payment away from joining this list. The road ahead is going to be incredibly rough for a lot of people. Ultimately, what this all means is that the Great Freight Recession isn't just some abstract economic headline or a boring chart in a financial report. It's a series of very real, very painful closures, layoffs, and desperate debt battles playing out in communities all across America. It's the story of AZA, Dolche, Indian Creek, and countless others. Watching who falls next isn't just industry gossip. It may be the single best indicator of where the American trucking industry, and by extension the broader economy, is truly headed. And right now, it's headed for a very steep, very bumpy downhill grade. Thank you for watching.